Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
I have something quite a bit different today that I'm really excited about. I want to discuss the documentary called A House in Between. And I know spooky season is technically over, but I'm not willing to let it go. So that's one reason I really want to get into this. But before that, Kelly, what's our question for today?
Okay, so I can't let spooky season go either. And I don't want to, and I won't. So the question I have today is, Sam, you've been to some haunted places, and some together with me. It was also just All Souls Day, which I will never stop talking about how the veil is thinnest that day between this world and the next. My question is, have you ever felt anything paranormal? Have you seen anything? If not, what was your favorite place that even though it wasn't paranormal, it was definitely spooky?
All right, so this is a really good question. And I kind of hinted you to ask something paranormal for this because that's what this documentary is about. And I'll go into some of this actually through my script here. But I have been to a lot of different places. I've taken part in investigations with a team.
Cool.
It was a lot of fun, but nothing came of it. So unfortunately, I haven't had any experiences myself. I wish I did. I've had one, I guess the one that I don't really talk about in my script here. I talk about the investigation a bit, but there was one time I was in Wisconsin. I was with a friend of mine and we were at this place called the Old Baraboo Inn, which is a tavern. It used to be an actual inn. And supposedly there's a ghost of a little boy running around. And at one point, and this is kind of like a true Wisconsin dive bar. Like everyone there seemed to be locals. Everyone knew each other's name. We were like the strangers in this bar.
Okay.
And so we're just sitting there chit-chatting with the bartender and the DJ, who is this older guy who was just absolutely hilarious. And he tried to do this like psychic trick on us, which was totally like a party game type of thing. But during all of this, I feel an incredibly cold spot on my legs. And it felt too cold. But the reason I'm still incredibly skeptical of it is the front door of the bar was open. And while I don't necessarily feel like the air would have been that cold coming from like the wind through the door, but it could have been. So that's the one experience that I kind of have had. But I don't know.
Was that the one that felt the spookiest to you? Like, have any in particular felt like this one's spooky? Or have they always just felt like buildings?
They've felt like buildings for the most part, but I will also say, I think a big part of that comes with how I went to them. Usually I was in large groups of people. I was taking a tour or something like that.
Sure.
And I think that definitely is more of a calming feeling when you know you're with like a dozen other people.
And a guide.
Exactly. And so like this was just an instance where bartender told us the story of this little boy. And then like half an hour later, it was me and my friends sitting there talking to the DJ and this happened. So that's why it felt like maybe, but we'll get into my personal views about the paranormal coming in here. I have a lot of discussion on it. But have you experienced anything?
Because I do too. Okay, so I'm glad you asked me this question because I am with you. I have not experienced anything. I have not seen anything except for the scary portrait of my great-grandmother that was in my grandma's house that I hated.
You've told me about this. Yeah.
Yes, I've mentioned it on the podcast because it was truly the most haunted object I've ever been around. I was like, nuh-uh. But the place that I went to that felt the spookiest. I was in a tour group. I had a guide. I had an audio tour that was incredible. The place that to me felt the spookiest and the most haunted when I walked in was Alcatraz in
I want to go to Alcatraz
California.
so bad. So bad.
Girl, it is spooky. Like the
It
audio
looks
tour,
spooky.
if y'all ever get out to California, I can't recommend enough the Alcatraz audio tour because it is not just an audio tour like, okay, now you're in this room. This happened here, XYZ. Like when you go into the kitchen of Alcatraz, you hear the sounds in the background of like plates clinking and prisoners eating, and you see
cool.
on the walls. It was the kitchen in particular that really, really, I was like, this feels haunted because you hear it's explaining the kitchen to you on the audio tour, and you hear the clinking of the spoons and the cooking of the food and the gabbling of the prisoners, and then you look at the wall and all of the cooking instruments were painted black behind each instrument so the chef could look right up and see if any of the instruments were missing that he wasn't holding.
Yeah, I've seen that, or I've seen like an outline drawn on the boards behind them.
Yes.
So you can see like exactly
so
what shape was supposed to be there.
Exactly. They had it fully painted black. Like, so like if a knife was missing, there was a black like a black painted knife on the wall. And if it wasn't in the chef's hand, he knew it was in a prisoner's hand. So that's why I was like, this feels spooky.
I've been on a boat around Alcatraz because I went to San Francisco. It was a last minute trip. Tip, if y'all ever go to San Francisco and want to do Alcatraz, book it ahead of time. There's aren't really last minute slots to get in there. So what we opted to do was take a ferry that went and circled to Alcatraz because that was the closest we could get. And I'll say, just from the boat, it's spooky looking.
Girl, it's scary. The thing is, they've done an incredible job of preserving it because we took the ferry up as well with the guided tour, and you take that ferry up and that building just starts to loom over you. Like the way they've
darker.
kept it.
I'm like, yeah.
It does. And there was a point, I haven't research this, I'm not reading from Wikipedia, but there was a point where there was an independent takeover of Alcatraz Island by, I believe it was a group of Native Americans.
Oh, interesting.
Who it was a reclaiming land effort or something such like that. So there's still all the like graffiti from them around the one part of it. There's a lot of like stuff around one part of the island where you can tell that at one point this was occupied. And it's a great position to be occupied because it's in the middle of the ocean for the same reason. It's a great reason to make it a prison.
Right.
Like
it's like a mile and a half from the shore? Was that it?
Oh, yeah, it's very close to shore. The ferry ride was 30 minutes max. But the closer you get to it, the more and more you start to feel like, oh, man, I'm going to prison.
Yeah, someday I need to get back there and do that. And I also, my number one place I want to go to is the Stanley Hotel. That is number one on my bucket list.
Where is that?
That is in Estes Park, Colorado, and that is where Stephen King got the idea to write The Shining.
Oh, that's perfect for you. Yeah,
that has been number one on my list since I was a little kid, and I desperately want to go. And that's where, he got the inspiration because he actually stayed there at the end of the season, and so that's when he kind of got the idea of a caretaker coming in and staying. But then they shot the movie. The exterior shots are a resort in Oregon. So I really want to go there as well. But specifically the Stanley Hotel is like number one up there for me.
I really want to go to the Cecil Hotel.
I have mixed feelings about the Cecil Hotel.
Get out, really?
Well, no, I think things are absolutely, well, we'll get into my views on the paranormal, but like, I think that there's absolutely potential there. I think a lot of things are greatly exaggerated, and I think a lot of things are sensationalized.
I want to go because it's essentially a pilgrimage for me. I'll share that on my Christmas list, there is literally a book. It's a brand new one, just came out. It's called Behind the Door, The Dark Truths and Untold Stories of the Cecil Hotel by Amy Price. For me, the reason I want to go to the Cecil is it is the genesis of, Sam, as you know, my murder that I am most fascinated with.
Yes. Okay. I know exactly where you're going with.
Yep, exactly where I was going. Yep, the Black Dahlia. I want to stay at the Cecil because I just want to walk that path and be in that area. And it someday, you guys, even though I'm sure you guys have heard the case of the Black Dahlia, I will cover it. I just haven't yet because I want to do it extremely right. Because also we've done something. It's a big case and it's very important to me. And I've also done something that I don't like when people do. I've called her the Black Dahlia. Her name is Elizabeth Short, and she was murdered. The media gave her the nickname the Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
So I love that. I don't love that case, but I'm fascinated by it and I just want to do it right. One day I'll do it.
Yeah, that'll be a one to really dive into. And honestly, that is a good possibility that'll turn into a multi-parter because there's a lot of information there.
There's tons.
But let's go ahead and dive into our case today, or not even a case, our discussion today. So as I mentioned, it's going to be a bit different, and I'm really excited to talk about it because I have a lot of mixed feelings, and I feel like this documentary guided me into a direction I really didn't expect it to. And technically, it's two documentaries. It's The House in Between and The House in Between Part 2. So they very much go hand in hand with each other. So there are times that I'll kind of be referencing them as one. But they are both based on a paranormal investigation at a house in Mississippi. And before I get too deep into the documentary, I do really want to discuss my views on the paranormal and paranormal investigating. And I'm sure, Kelly, I would love to hear your views. I'm sure you have your own opinions with all of this. But
honestly, I think you and I are pretty aligned, but I'll let you get out at first.
I think we are for the most part, but there might be some differences kind of as we go along here. But overall, I am definitely a skeptic. But I always say that I'm a skeptic who wants to believe. So like with the whole thing I was talking about with the cold at my legs, I would like to believe that that was the spirit of the little boy, but I can't be confident of that because the door was open behind me. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I want to believe.
I really want to believe.
But I really want to believe. But like we just discussed in our intro questions, neither of us have had like substantial encounters.
And there's definitely some evidence that I just don't understand. I'm also not a scientist. So maybe that's definitely a big factor. But evidence that doesn't have a scientific explanation is what I'm very interested in because I like to pair science and studies to the paranormal. And unfortunately, the science community often doesn't work like that. Not that they don't always. And we'll actually see in these documentaries that they do quite well. It's just, it's not uncommon to hear a scientist has zero belief in the paranormal.
Right.
And I believe that many experiences that seem to be paranormal actually do have a logical explanation and scientific explanations that are completely outside of paranormal. And I don't say that to like discount anyone's experience, because I feel like in the moment it probably feels supernatural or paranormal. But if you really kind of dig into it, you can probably find some logical explanations that aren't apparent in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand how like the brain goes there. It is pretty basic psychology.
Yeah.
With how your brain kind of fills in gaps that you don't know. And that can then also create more of a heightened paranormal feeling. That's very, very normal psychology for people.
Yeah.
And a big part of my view is, as we were kind of talking about, is based on my own experience. I have put myself in so many different situations where I would hopefully experience something paranormal, but I haven't. At least not in confidence.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I put myself in these places too. Like, I'm waiting. I'm like, yo, what's up? And the thing for me, you mentioned paranormal investigations. And I feel differently about the paranormal and paranormal investigations. So as we go, I'll probably share a little bit about how I feel about the paranormal investigations in general.
There are some things that I think, I don't know what you're going to say, but I'm pretty sure you and I are on the exactly same page with this, just knowing you. And that's also another reason I personally really like this documentary, is because it takes the things that I think are more concrete evidence and amplifies that and tries to explain it and debunk, when it takes the things that just are kind of, I don't want to say the word like wishy-washy, but like you just can't prove it as easily, whether it is or isn't. They don't even really kind of touch that stuff. They don't want that to cloud anyone's judgment, so they don't even attempt it. So that's another reason I was very interested in this specifically.
Yeah.
But as I kind of mentioned earlier, I was actually part of a paranormal investigation. We had a team come into my college. This is something that they do professionally, and I got to go with them. And
wow,
it was really cool. It was just a fun experience to see the whole behind the scenes process of everything. We investigated my college library. And my college was built in 1851, and it was literally built around a cemetery. So it's like, if anything's going to happen, this is a fantastic place for it to happen.
Yeah, good spot.
Yeah, and I was with a group in the stacks in the library, and we had audio recorders to hopefully capture an EVP. And we got absolutely nothing.
Sam, I'm so sorry. You'll probably have to repeat that. Could you say for me what is an EVP?
It's an electronic voice phenomenon, and I have a bit more of a description later on, but good point to bring it up early. Okay. So there's a few ways that an EVP potentially could work. So it's a voice recorder that typically you want to get a higher end one that can get more frequencies of sound. So like you can do it with your phone, people have, but to be more professional and have potentially more concrete evidence, you want to get a higher end one. But
yeah, I've seen them used. Like, I just don't know what for. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. So it's if you are basically what we had to do in this, and we spent, I don't know, like 2 hours in the stacks, just all of us just sitting on the floor in like separate areas of the stacks. We had 3 or 4 recorders, and you ask questions. So it was like, is there somebody here with us? If you are here, can you say your name? Or can you make a loud noise? Can you bang on something for us? And you ask a question, you wait in silence for a little bit, and then you continue on, you ask another one, and you just kind of go on in this process. A lot of our time was sitting in silence.
And does the EVP, like, if you say, is somebody here with us? Does the EVP audio play that for you, or do you have to like play it back and listen to it later?
You have to play it back and listen to it later. Like, you can sit there, turn it off, rewind, and replay it. But then you have the risk of missing something else that could be said. So a lot of times investigators will just do their session and then go back and listen to it all. And sometimes you can hear the voice like in person. But that's a whole lot less likely. It is typically just in the recording. So you ask your question, you hear nothing when you're sitting there, but maybe you'll get a cognizant answer when you listen back later.
On the replay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for taking this diversion. I just need a clarification. I truly didn't know how they operated or what they did.
Yeah, and EVPs are very interesting to me. I will say a lot of times I'm watching these shows and things, and they say like, "Oh, we think we heard this in the EVP," but it kind of sounds like a jumble of noises to me. I think there's a few reasons for that. I think a lot of times EVPs are very much up for interpretation. And I think a lot of times when we're listening to it through our TVs, through a show or something, our audio's not great. Like, I'm just listening through my TV speakers. Yeah. I don't know.
Right. Okay, so sorry to derail us. We are in the library in the stacks. And what happened?
Nothing on the recordings. Wow. We ask the questions, no bangs, no voices, like truly nothing happened. And it was like the paranormal team, they left and they came back like a week or two later after they analyzed everything to like give a full presentation to us. They're like, "We're sorry."
Their presentation was like, nothing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But then, like, also with all of this, I've gone into different like abandoned buildings that have all sorts of lore and history. I actually have bricks in my apartment that I use as bookends that are supposedly from a haunted house, that are the bricks themselves are supposedly haunted. Yeah, according to the legend back, and I got these when I was in high school. Like, I've had these for a very, very long time. And according to the legend back then, if you took a brick from this site, which you're not supposed to, like,
right, sure,
you're not supposed to. But supposedly, if you take a brick, you die within a year. Well, that was like 20 years ago, and I have multiple bricks.
Okay. So we're doing good. How do you feel? Are you feeling okay?
They're fantastic bookends, and they have a good story to them. So.
So supposedly you would die within a year, but within a year you found out they make fantastic bookends, and that's a great outcome.
Yeah, I once had one like holding up my AC in my apartment in the summer. They've come in very handy in my life.
Thanks, like ancestors who built this haunted building,
right? But like I've also been on like so many different ghost tours. And honestly, I believe more than anything, that's marketing. At least when it comes to public tours, a lot of times it's just kind of marketing. But again, I got nothing, like no experiences. And like I said, I desperately want to believe, but I also really feel like I need to exhaust all other potential explanations. And since I'm not a paranormal investigator, although I think I would absolutely love to be, like, I think I would really have a lot of fun with that. And I like breaking things down to understand them. And I think that's a huge part of what paranormal investigating is. But until I have those moments, I will continue to be a skeptic.
Yeah. And since we brought it up with paranormal investigations, this one sounds like it was done extremely well, like very cool, very thought out, presentation afterward, EVPs for everyone. What gets me with paranormal investigations is these television shows about them. I think the television shows about paranormal investigations are just, like you just said, marketing. I
there think are two that we're going to talk about here, which I think are probably two of the best, but every other one I have seen, I don't like.
Do either of them involve Zach Bagans?
No, that's why I like them.
Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. You guys, if you listen to this podcast, we've talked about spooky things before. And I'm telling you right now, I love spooky things. And if I never see one more minute of Zach Bagans trying to fight a ghost in my life, I will be happy.
Yeah. And one thing, and this kind of goes with a lot of the Zach Bagans stuff. I didn't put this in my script. I honestly was really debating it. I might cut this out later. But to me, also as a non-religious person, there's so much that comes into paranormal conversation that strictly has to do with religion. And I think Ghost Adventures, which is Zach Bagans' show, frequently discusses that. It, like, whether it's demons or demonic activity or things like that. I personally am not a non-religious person, so to me, that doesn't fit into the narrative of what the paranormal potentially could be if I end up believing in it.
Right. That's not exactly opening doors when you put something as big as religion on the table.
Exactly.
And I just think I'm just so tired of watching him in empty rooms, just swinging his fists around, never keeping up his right, always saying he's going to punch out these ghosts. Like,
right.
Dude,
that, like the antagonizing.
I'm so tired of you
as well. It just doesn't make sense to me.
It's like a tactic, but like, what? You're going to fight the ghost? You're going to fight it, Zach? Okay, Zach. Like, he feels like someone you would meet at a bar. Like, who's like, I seen a ghost and I fought it.
Well, he's from the Chicago area originally. You could run into a bar if he's around here.
No, I can't leave my house. No.
But let's go ahead and dive into this documentary a little bit and kind of introduce some of the people involved. So as I mentioned, it's called The House in Between. And Steve Gonsolves and Kendall Whelpton are co-directors. Steve is a paranormal investigator, and he is well known as one of the original team members of TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society. And he is on the show Ghost Hunters, and he is a lead investigator on the show Ghost Nation. So those are the two shows that I actually like.
Okay, so he does two shows, and he did this documentary.
Exactly. And I think that's the reason I like it, is because I like his investigation tactics. He doesn't bring in religion almost any of the time. There's a couple times they bring in like a non-denominational priest. But that's usually upon like a family request type of thing. But they don't turn this back to that this is some sort of poltergeist that needs to be exorcised or anything like that. Their view is that, okay, they obviously believe that ghosts are real, but that they really just stem from the lives of real people. They're like, they do kind of mention, oh yeah, there could be an entity that isn't from a human, and I'm very curious on that. I haven't seen every episode of the show, but in every episode I've seen, they've never come to that conclusion during an investigation. So I find that really interesting.
Okay.
And they also do a lot of work in their shows to do that scientific debunking, which is also something I appreciate. Cool. And that's why I'm a fan of these shows. And Steve Gonsolves also just recently released a book about paranormal adventures, and it was pretty fun. Like, he just talked about like what he does when he goes on these investigations and some of the experiences that he's had. And a lot of it's emotional. But it's a fun book. I do definitely recommend it. I did his audiobook and he reads it. So that was really kind of fun to listen to.
Cool.
And then Kendall Whelpton, he was actually a camera operator and eventually became a director of photography for Ghost Hunters. So he's been working with Steve Gonsolves for quite a while, seems like many years. Ghost Hunters started, I think, in 2003. So it's actually one of the oldest running ghost shows on TV.
It sure is. Feels like it's been forever.
I know, right? And
I'm such a hater. I'm sorry.
We're old. We're old.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're old. We've been getting annoyed by Zach Bagans for so long.
Right. I'm pretty sure Zach Bagans' show was quite a few years after Ghost Hunters started.
So Ghost Hunters is not... What is his show's name?
Ghost Adventures is Zach Bagans. So he's not involved in Ghost Hunters or Ghost Nation. So he's not involved in the story at all.
Okay, so Kendall Whelpton eventually becomes director of photography for Ghost Hunters, which is a separate show.
Which is what Steve Gonsolves is on.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's worked on many different shows for Discovery Network. He did... I think it's called Finding Bigfoot was a big one that he did. He's done a ton of stuff.
That's on my to-watch list.
What?
That's on my to-watch list.
Oh, I haven't even seen a trailer or anything, but I know people have been talking about it.
It's on my to-watch list. You guys, again, Discovery Plus does not sponsor us, but it is the best money I spend every month, and all of these shows... You said they're on the Discovery Network?
Yeah, well, some of it is. So... Ghost Hunters seems like they changed networks a few times. They were on A&E for quite a while. And so a couple seasons are on Discovery, but Ghost Nation is all on Discovery. And honestly, I like Ghost Nation a little bit more. So if I'm going to recommend watching one of those two, go with that one because it does much more of a deep dive into each case. And they spend like a week at each location and they dive really deep into the history of the land, the building, the town. It's really interesting. And it's much more of a deep dive than Ghost Hunters is. But I feel like this documentary is a great example of what truly interests me within the paranormal investigation, kind of along the lines we've already been talking about. And then there's the follow-up, The House in Between Two, which... As I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm probably going to be referring to them hand in hand a few times, kind of the same thing, because you can't watch the second one without watching the first. It'll make no sense. There's so much backstory in the first. And so they're kind of one thing in my head. I also watched them back to back because I finished the first one and immediately had to start the second one. So just kind of know that I'm kind of referring to it as a whole. Most of the documentary is truly attempting to discount potential paranormal anomalies more than anything else. There is obviously investigation that goes into it. It's your typical EVP sessions, or they have these things called REM pods, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But it's basically they create an electronic field, and if it's disrupted, then that's potential. Signifying that there's something physically there to disrupt the field, even if you don't physically see it. That's potentially paranormal. So they obviously do all that sort of stuff, which is what you're going to typically see in the shows like Ghost Hunters and in Ghost Nation. But they bring in a ton of scientists and different sorts of people into this documentary to make every attempt that they can to disprove the paranormal. So that's why I find this very interesting, why I really wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
This is really about this one specific home in Florence, Mississippi, that is owned by Alice Jackson. And Alice purchased this property and built a house on it in 1990. Previously, it was just land. I don't believe there was any house there. So she kind of started off fresh, building this new house. And this was her dream home. She helped design the house. This was everything that she wanted out of it. And shortly after moving in, she started to experience potential paranormal activity. Doors were slamming. The doorbell was ringing. And Alice even recalls this one point, which was pretty interesting to me, that she heard a loud bang. And this was after she was closing up the house for the night. She locked the doors, put the deadbolt on, all of it. And then this loud bang happens, and she runs downstairs to see what it was. And she saw the front door open with the deadbolt still engaged. So you know how, like, when you lock a deadbolt and the door's open, the metal piece sticks out? That's how it was. So we don't have any, like, visual evidence of this, but that's very interesting. That's a pretty creepy thing to happen.
That's odd. That's pretty creepy. You don't do that unless you're, like, running down to get your mail or something.
Well, you can't open the door that way. It's not physically possible. Right. Unless you're breaking that door frame.
Right, unless you've broken through the lock. Yeah, I was a little confused. I was like, how did they get that? Like,
yeah, typically you can only do that when the door is fully closed or fully opened, when you see the bolt come out. Yeah. So that was something that was very interesting, kind of right off the bat in the beginning of the documentary. And then in 2011, so 21 years after Alice built the house, she experienced something that would actually cause her to not want to sleep in the house again. She was in bed. It was around midnight. All the lights were off. Like, she was literally just, like, attempting to fall asleep at this point. And she saw some sort of light come through into her bedroom. And she turns over in her bed, and the way that she talks about it, it doesn't sound like it was emitting light. It was just like a light form from just her descriptions. I kind of thought of it as a shadow, but kind of the opposite. Where it's like a shadow, they have defined lines. You know, it does dissipate a little bit, but you can tell. Because the way she describes it is like it didn't light up the whole room. She just saw this light. So that's interesting.
And was it moving? Or it was just shining into her bedroom?
It was shining into her bedroom. I'm not entirely sure. She makes the comment of, like, she rolled over in bed and she saw it. So there's not the we don't quite know if it moved into her room or it manifested in her room. I'm not entirely sure on that. But obviously that would be terrifying either way if you experienced that.
Either way, yes.
And so this encounter is what made her say she was never going to sleep another night in this house.
Wow.
And so she left. That was her last night there. Right. And the house was still fully furnished. You'll even see in the second documentary that, like, they open up one of her closets and it's still filled with clothes. It's like she didn't take her wardrobe with her. She still goes to the house. She goes during the day or with people. She doesn't like to go alone, especially at night. But she never sleeps there.
Wow. That is not, she just fully picked, something happened. You don't just fully pick up, like, you don't just leave everything you own.
Exactly.
In your dream home that you built. I feel so bad for her that she built this dream home. And now she's like, leave everything in it. I'll buy new stuff. Forget it. Something happened.
And Alice was worried about her neighbor's perception of her. Because, like, this is the South. Like, a lot of religious...
I'm sorry, where are we again? Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi. I thought you were talking about where in the script. Okay. Yes, we're in Florence, Mississippi.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so
she was really worried about like what people would think of her. And eventually, kind of after some time, it sounds like, she took part in a segment on a local news station about the haunting. And this helped her become more comfortable with her experiences. Not enough to sleep in her home again, but enough for her to be able to talk openly about it and get help. And one of her coworkers recommended that she reach out to John Bullard, who is a local paranormal investigator. And one thing I'd like to note here, which is mainly for my personal curiosity, I would like to know more about Alice. They don't really go into her too much overall. Like, what's her occupation? It seems like she's doing well enough to financially move out of her home and into somewhere else while keeping her home.
Yeah. And leave everything.
Yeah, and we'll find out that she has kids. But we have no word of her husband. Like, did he pass away? Did they just divorce and they're no longer in any sort of relationship? Because she kept making comments that, like, she doesn't want to be alone. So, assuming
and she always brought someone with her
exactly,
at night. But never mentions like brought her husband with her. So maybe they did divorce her.
And I think a lot of this is probably either upon her request or just for her protection. Like, the story's not technically about her. But it just felt like it was kind of brushed over a little bit. I would be curious to have a couple more details to kind of feed my curiosity. But just some interesting things I was thinking of while watching it. So sometime around 2015, I believe, that's kind of another thing that I wish was a little more defined, was the timeline. We know 2011 she left the house. I don't know when she did that first news segment to talk to John Bullard. I kind of am trying to piece together these next parts here. But my guess is 2015, another local paranormal investigator caught a news segment on the home and decided to reach out to Alice himself. This man was Brad Cooney, and he was a former boxing journalist and has a boxing podcast. And he likes to do paranormal investigation kind of in his retirement. And John and Brad, they didn't know each other before this. They'd never investigated together. But they were both having very similar paranormal experiences, which when they did start investigating together, just kind of reiterated that, like, something's happening here. And at this point,
so they both men went to the house.
Yes, individually, and then eventually met together. John Bullard was first. So this was after that news segment. And then I think it potentially was a couple years later that Brad Cooney came into the mix. So, like I said, this is kind of a foggy timeline here. I would be very interested to kind of get that nailed down, but I've watched this documentary a couple times now. So,
and they were both in. Important thing is they both were in the house.
Yes. And they're featured heavily in this documentary. They're the two main investigators in the documentary. And at this point, mainly their experiences were footsteps, lights turning off. There's a dining room chandelier, which was commonly would turn off. And then electromagnetic devices going off when that electromagnetic field is broken. So that's what I was kind of saying earlier with a REM pod. That's the device that they use. So this would signify that someone is physically close to that device, but they're not seeing anybody. And so John and Brad felt like whatever paranormal activity was in this house was actually learning how to use the tools they were provided to communicate. So they would introduce like a REM pod, and it would take a while. They would have to kind of explain, please, like, if you are here, please come close to this device. It will, because what it'll do is it has an antenna, and that's what creates this electromagnetic field around it. And if you get close to it, it'll buzz and it'll light up one light that's on it. But if you get closer, it's directional. So it'll light up different lights in different colors. If you're to the right of it, it'll light up the light that's to the right. If you're to the left of it, same thing on the left. So they're trying to explain this to the potential paranormal entity that's there. And eventually it started going off. So they really felt like they were teaching whoever this was, whatever spirit this is, to use these tools.
Right.
And that's always something
which kind of makes sense if you're a good paranormal investigator, I think. You know, you want to explain your tools to these quote unquote spirits, so these quote unquote spirits know how to communicate with you.
Well, also, like, if you think about it, and I remember doing this when we were doing the investigation in the library, we kind of did the same thing. Like, go ahead and talk into this device. We'll be able to hear you later. Because imagine if, like, you don't know what spirits could be there, They could be from 200 years ago. They have no clue what electricity is. So sometimes you really need to teach because they have zero reference into that within their living life.
Yes.
So that they felt like they were actually teaching the spirit to communicate. And they especially felt this way after they put a baseball on one of the stairs in the house. This staircase is along the side of the living room, and the stairs themselves are carpeted. And it's not like a super flat carpet. It is a bit plush. The ball sat there for days without moving. At that one point, caught on video, the ball rolls down the stairs. So that was very interesting.
Interesting. Yes. Interesting.
And this is kind of where I get into the point of why I really like this documentary. Because instead of just saying, yes, this is paranormal, it's a ghost, they brought in a contractor to the house to test if the house had potentially shifted over time and was no longer level. Wow. The house was level.
What a good idea. Oh.
Yeah, right? And so he was able to determine that it was level. There's no reason this ball should have moved on its own when it comes to that sort of thing.
Oh, wow.
Secondly, they brought in an electrician to test why the lights were going off in the dining room. And this was a very common occurrence at this point. The lights would constantly flicker or just turn off. He, again, determined no issues, no electrical issues whatsoever to cause that to happen.
Wow.
So this is why I'm saying like I really liked it, is because they're truly bringing people in who are completely outside of the paranormal field, trying to find an explanation.
Yeah.
And it's at this point in the documentary when Alice calls Steve Gonsolves. And from my understanding, Steve started to investigate Alice's house for a while before deciding to make the documentary. Again, timeline's a little bit difficult to determine. But from the sound of it, he had communication with her for quite a while and had been to the house before they even made the decision to do the documentary. But given his status as a well-known paranormal investigator and the connections that he's made over the years, in addition to Kendall Whelpton, who Steve has worked with on many different occasions on different shows. And Kendall doesn't really appear on camera as much as Steve. So we'll have a couple moments where we talk about him, but Steve's kind of the main focus here because he is the face of it. But they were able to contact scientists who were willing to speak on the potential scientific connection to the paranormal. And if they could explain
I love that.
And so during an interview I was listening to, it's the Strange Story podcast. Both Steve and Kendall were on there, and they said that they contacted dozens of scientists, and over 30 of them said no to interviews because they didn't want that connection between their science and the paranormal. They just weren't believers. They didn't want to be part of it.
Wow.
But then in addition, they said no to scientists who were willing to discuss it because they believed in the paranormal so much. They wanted scientists who were non-believers but willing to talk about how science and paranormal potentially could mix, even though they were skeptics themselves. So that's something that I found really interesting.
That's a good
idea. Went in deep into this conversation on this podcast, which we'll link because it was very, very interesting to listen to. But they wanted to be able to ask questions and get a scientific answer. And then with the scientist, they would then break down things further to get more details. For example, that ball. They wanted to see like, okay, so we know force has to get the ball engaged to move. Once it moves, it's going to keep moving because it's on stairs. It's going to fall. It's going to continue to roll, and it's going to go far because of that. But what's that force that starts that movement?
Right. And they did so well, like following up on that. Like the contractor said, this house is level as can be.
Yeah, well, they took this further, too. So they had these conversations with these multiple scientists, and their top conclusions of what this could be that are natural and not paranormal would likely be wind, magnetic, or a shift in the environment. Those were like the three logical things that would be the most common to cause this ball to move. So Steve goes back to the house to test these theories. He gets a very high-powered magnet and tests if somehow there was some sort of metal in this baseball that could have created some sort of magnetic field and energy. Nothing. Like, you wouldn't think that there's metal in a baseball, but you got to test it to say no.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, you wouldn't think it, but you're right. Someone does have to test it before you can conclusively say it. But
exactly.
You would assume.
And then he got a can of air to see if he could simulate potential wind. And he had to have that can of air directly next to the baseball just to get it to shift. Like, it barely moved at that point. So that really kind of ruled out wind. And then the contractor came in, already ruled out the environmental part of it and the house shifting. But what Steve also tried to do is, like, this is a staircase. So there's a closet under the staircase, common in many, many homes. And he tried to go underneath and smash, like, not smash, like break through, but like hit the ceiling of this closet, which is the angled staircase, to see if that potentially shifts it. Nothing.
Right. Wow.
So they're really trying to do their best to debunk this.
Yeah.
And nothing is working. And this is the exact sort of thing. I know I've said this a few times, but this is what I love to see in a documentary. I like that grit work is fascinating to me. And like, I love
the
all the
research
investigation
and the context.
Exactly. Like, it's fun to watch some of these ghost shows and they're in the dark trying to get an EVP, or they have these REM pods around, or whatever tools they're using. Like, that's fun. But as someone who is skeptical, I want to see this stuff go into it.
Yeah.
So at this point, they go back to talking about the lights that Alice witnessed and the bizarre lights that didn't cast light into the rest of the room. And the big theory that gets brought up is aliens, which I don't think is necessarily a surprise in the conversation. But what was really kind of funny to me, and I very much agree with this, and this is after John, Brad, and Alice all bring up aliens in their interviews, and then Steve's interview is last. And he flat out says, I definitely think potential extraterrestrial life is there. Do I think it was in Alice's bedroom? No, I definitely don't think so. Waiting on her alien visit. Like, nah, I don't think it's aliens.
Yeah. He's like, sure, yeah. I mean, they're out there. Do I think they're in this bedroom? Right. Probably not.
And I agree with this because, like, okay, if this is paranormal, do you think this is paranormal and aliens? Probably not. That seems like an incredibly, like, low likelihood that it would be both.
That would, I mean, you wouldn't call it lucky, but you would have to be incredibly coincidental to have both ghosts and aliens in your home.
Exactly.
Like, that's a huge coincidence to just have ghosts in your house.
Right.
So now you got ghosts and aliens? I don't know.
Yeah. So the next person they bring into the house is a psychic. And Steve says that he often doesn't work with psychics because it's very difficult to verify what they say. And again, I'm a skeptic when it comes to psychics. I really, really want to believe that people have the psychic ability.
I do too, and I would like to draw attention to, I don't remember, your case with the poor woman who was on the boat. And
Lori Cadotte was the psychic in that case.
Yes.
And that's like that. That's why I want to believe is I want things like that to be true.
I do want to believe too. I've just had bad experiences with psychics. Like, I have a if y'all haven't seen a psychic yet, I recommend having a weed out question, which is just a question that is a lie, and ask them that. And if they know the right answer, then move on. And every psychic I've ever had has always told me that I would have children, and one told me I would have twins. And that is how I always know that the psychic knows nothing about me.
Right.
And it's unfortunate. I want them to pass and be like, nah, you'll never have kids. Kids will suck all your money. That's what you think. Right. Like, that's what I want. But it hasn't happened yet. I'm waiting.
Yeah, I've been to a couple psychics, and I've even been to a psychic at Crowhaven's Corner in Salem, Massachusetts, which is actually the store that Lori Cadott started. Mm-hmm. She didn't own it when I was there.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be one of the best places, if not the best place to go to in Salem. And so, like, we were really stoked to get these bookings when we were there.
Yeah.
And they actually told me I had the ability and that I should start working on it. So that was kind of where I'm like, I don't know. I don't think this is in me.
I don't know, Sam. What do you feel? How do you start working on that?
I say she told it followed up with like, you should take my class. And so then I'm like, are you trying to get money?
Oh. Right. Are you trying? Is this a psychic MLM right now?
Yeah, like she was super nice. I really enjoyed my session with her. Like, that's not to discount her. Mm-hmm. She was really nice. And there were a few things that she said in there that were like, okay, that's interesting. But they kind of also followed kind of generic topics.
Yeah.
So it's like, could there something be there? Yeah, there could be. There were some things that definitely made some sense that she said, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm still a skeptic.
Yeah.
But what they wanted
I haven't been to one. I wanted to happen. I just still haven't been to one that has given me anything.
Yeah.
Of use. I recommend if any of y'all go to New Orleans, go to the Bottom of the Cup tea room. They read tea leaves there, and it is very fun. It is a very fun experience. The man who read my tea leaves, the reason I actually went is that tea is huge in my family. It's very odd. It just happened. And my grandmother on my mom's side used to read tea leaves. Oh, so I really wanted to get my leaves read. Yes. My grandmother. And I wanted to get my tea leaves read, and this man, first of all, I didn't get to drink the cup of tea, which I was bummed about because I love tea. He just kind of and then he did the reading, and not a single thing in the reading was correct. And then they give you a CD to go home with of the reading, and I'm like, sir, where am I even supposed to play this? But it was still extremely fun.
That sounds like a fun experience, whether you fully buy into it or not. It just sounds fun.
It was extremely fun, whether you bought into it or not. It was very fun. But also, they give you a CD, so get ready for that, I guess, buy something off eBay.
Oh, that's funny. But one thing that they wanted to do for this documentary was not let the psychic know any details about the location or the activity. And I'm assuming she knew she was in Florence, Mississippi, but nothing beyond that. And she never met Alice before any of this either. This was their first interaction, and it was filmed. It was kind of awkward which made it seem very genuine.
Yeah.
And almost immediately the psychic went towards the back door. So she entered through the front door of the house and was just like drawn to the back door. And she said she just needs to go out through that door. And she took a moment, stared back at the house from the backyard at the door itself. And she just kind of muttered to herself, like, that's important. And she seemed almost a little shaken by it. But after she walks through the rest of the house, she sits down with Alice. And she tells her kind of everything that's kind of going through her head. And she also mentions that she's been having dreams for the last week or so. And in her dreams, she keeps seeing a door. And she drew this door before coming onto the property, and it looked like a fairly basic exterior door. So like it kind of matched what the door looked like on the house, but it's a very standard look. But one interesting thing that she drew in this drawing was a wooden walking stick leaning against the door. Alice happens to collect wooden walking sticks. So that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, I see where you're going with this, but I'm not quite there yet.
Right, yeah, I'm not giving you my money yet, but that is interesting.
Yeah, like I'm still listening. I haven't stopped listening yet.
No,
and she
not yet.
She asked Alice if there used to be another house behind hers. And Alice says, well, yes. And the psychic said that the man who lived there was not a good man and that he killed another man in the yard. And so that was kind of interesting, but that's also like kind of seems like a big thing. And again, as a skeptic, I'm listening, and I'm going to keep listening and see if things line up.
Yeah, as a skeptic, I would want, and maybe you'll speak to this in a moment, but I would like to see an arrest report or a murder citation or some sort of documentation that someone was killed in this yard.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that fairly quick. We'll come back a couple times to it.
Okay.
She also says that she saw a lot of fire. And what is very interesting at this point is that the fire detector in the home starts to go off as if it has a low battery. Just like a beep or two every couple of minutes. And so that was interesting. It was like in that moment that the fire conversation came up, this started.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And then we hear that the town of Florence had been destroyed by a fire multiple times. They've rebuilt this town a couple times. And
Florence is where we are, right?
Yes.
Sorry, I keep losing track of that.
Yep.
Okay, so
Florence,
the whole ass town. So we're doing better. They burned down a couple times. Chicago only burned down once.
Right. They had a lot less to rebuild than Chicago did after that. But next we meet the next door neighbor. She's an adult now, but she has lived in that home next door since she was 5 years old. And she says as a child, she always had weird feelings about the house next door. She obviously knew Alice, and Alice treated her very well. She seems to have a lot of respect for Alice, but she said that she always had a weird feeling next door and that she believed someone was buried in the backyard. And she says that she got the sense of this when she was 6 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, I'd say, like, I don't know exactly how old she is, but I'd say she's minimally in her mid to late 20s, if not early 30s. So I would say at least 20 years she's believed this. Minimum 20 years.
She's, remembered it too. Like, remembered that sensation of something being wrong. Like, that's pretty remarkable.
So taking this information and the psychic's information, they start to investigate the backyard. They bring in cadaver dogs to see if there could be any truth to these statements. And the cadaver dog seems to vaguely hit on an area. The dog trainer explains that this is indeed a positive hit, but the dog is hitting off of the trees, not the ground. So she explains this, and this is something I'd never heard of before. So I actually dove a little deeper into my own research to verify this because it was very interesting to me. But she explains that if a body was buried there, as the trees would grow, it would use the body as nourishment. So the scent would actually be coming from the tree.
Wow.
So again, like I said, I've never heard of this before, but it's an interesting idea, and I understand at least the basics of it.
That is very interesting. I did know that if you bury a body under a tree, the tree can obviously use your body as nutrients. And I know it sometimes kills the tree, but I haven't heard of it the tree actually emanating the scent.
Yeah.
That is quite interesting and compelling.
When I started to look this up outside of the documentary, it was honestly kind of hard to find people discussing this. But I did find an article, which we will link, that talked about an investigation where they used cadaver dogs and they hit similarly on a tree. And in this article, they explain that it is the roots of the tree that spread the scent out. And that's why they can't hit on one specific spot, because it's kind of all over in the area. This article did not mention anything about the trunk of a tree, and the dogs seem to really be like looking up the tree in this. So like that article makes even more sense to me. But interesting, like that is something that seems like is a potential.
That it's like I said, that's compelling to me. Whenever cadaver, I think on any murder, any dead body investigation, anything like that, I think always, I'm not a police officer or an investigator, but I think always the first move should always be get a run of cadaver dogs through there, because just owning a dog, like the sense of smell is so powerful in that dog. And if it's been trained right, you have a good chance at potentially finding something.
Right.
So that's always been kind of my position.
Yeah, and this dog trainer, she also mentioned to Steve and the other paranormal investigators that they should start looking into local records to see if a cemetery had ever occupied the grounds. Because even if the bodies were moved, this still could cause the scent to spread within the trees. So that was something that was also kind of like an interesting idea that hadn't been discussed yet. And this is exactly what Steve does. He goes to a local historian and this historian explains that a large part of Florence, which is very close and potentially even on Alice's property, used to be a cemetery. But unfortunately, due to the fires in Florence, all of the town records in relation to this section of the cemetery were destroyed. So they have no actual records if her property was exactly on the cemetery, if there were bodies buried there. Yeah. So that is something that they're coming across as like very difficult in their investigation, and kind of to the point you made earlier. You want to see arrest records, you want to see like investigation records on someone who's potentially murdered. It might not exist.
Yeah, it could very well just be. And I want to believe if I were a spirit and my entire cemetery was destroyed along with the records, you can imagine that would maybe make someone feel restless and disassociated and want to haunt the living. Because their death is no longer, it's like they've disappeared.
Yeah. And really, this is basically where the first documentary comes to a close. But before it officially does, there is something very interesting that happens. And this is honestly kind of like the biggest climax of the documentary, because it's like, it's very confusing. Because I don't have an explanation for it. And I don't want to give it away, but I think I kind of have to. So you all know this is kind of a big spoiler alert for the first documentary.
So if you're going to watch it, hit 30-second skip, 30-second skip, 30-second skip.
Yeah, hit it a couple times, because this is going to be a bit of a discussion that I'm sure you and I will get into. As the film crew was packing up and leaving, Kendall was alone in the home, and so he's just kind of getting some of the last stuff. You actually see Steve and John and Brad leave out the front door of the house, because they have like security cameras and static cameras set up. There's not a cameraman operating at this point or anything. And as Kendall's gathering these items, he's just casually walking around, and the ball rolls down the stairs again. And based on his reaction, I get the sense that this is the first time it has happened while the film crew was on site. It was like he kind of panicked and would freak out for a moment. And he immediately calls out the front door to Steve. And you literally, it's kind of funny. You see him bolt back into the house. Like he came full speed back into this house. And
who you gonna call?
Right?
Steve.
And he sees the ball like rolling at the base of the stairs. And so everyone immediately stops what they're doing to investigate. And they go into one of the back bedrooms where they have like a computer set up and stuff so that they can review that footage immediately. And while they're doing this, they hear a door slam. And Steve goes out thinking it was just Alice arriving because she wasn't home at that point. And he finds the front door open. No Alice. And he goes back to where Kendall and Brad were reviewing this footage, just confused. Like, you can totally tell he's like, what? Like, she's not here. And then both, like, Kendall and Brad are like, wait, what? Like, we heard that. We all heard that.
Right. Yeah.
And so this was kind of a really neat moment in the documentary because it really seemed like a lot of really raw emotion. Like, it wasn't meant to be filmed. And I don't want to go too much deeper into that part of it, but you guys should absolutely watch it. It's really kind of a fun part of it. And it's that climax that you hope for in a paranormal documentary. And then it cuts to a week later and it's Brad and he's reviewing this footage over and over again at the time for when they heard this door. And there's a camera set up. It faces the front door. You see the front door is open the whole time because when Steve bolts back into this house, it just stays open. He doesn't touch it. It's the last thing on your mind at this point. And
Steve is moving.
Yeah, like he clearly doesn't care about shutting the door behind him. And Brad is reviewing this footage, and so he obviously sees Steve run in. Then they all go out of shot to go to this back bedroom, and he's reviewing the moment when they hear this slamming. You can hear it in the cameras. Like, obviously something happened, but nothing is visible. And he then notices, kind of in the corner of the frame, is the chandelier that's for the dining room. And at the bottom of this chandelier is a brass globe. And he's seeing in the reflection of the globe 2 doors opening and closing behind the camera, one of them slamming. It was such a cool moment.
What? Also, what a good investigator.
Right? He said he spent like a week watching this footage and not seeing it. And then it like just hit him at this moment of like, that's it. I see it. And they zoom in on that globe and you can see it clearly what's happening. But what's also very interesting.
For it to be the dining room.
Yeah.
For it to be the dining room chandelier too.
That keeps lighting up.
Like had turning on. Yeah, they've been investigating already and it's a dining room chandelier that's wow. Sorry. Yeah. Go on.
Well, one thing that's also incredibly interesting with this is the door that slammed is the same door the psychic pointed out.
Oh.
And that's the end of the first documentary.
Wow. Okay. So you didn't have me with the ball rolling down the stairs?
Right.
Honestly.
Like, it's interesting.
But then everything after that.
Okay. Yeah.
Everything after that, because I figured with the ball rolling down the stairs, I was like, oh, okay, maybe people were just packing up and somebody like hit the door frame with like a backpack or
you will see if that doesn't happen. Like no one's like near that. It. Like Kendall's the only one in the home. Like it is weird.
Okay.
It's weird. But
because y'all I haven't watched these documentaries.
Yeah, I told her not to watch
follow up here. I know nothing. So like but the ball didn't get me, but the slamming door and who are you gonna call? Steve Gonsolves. He runs in. He knows what's up. Like that, and then again to have it be the chandelier that they've been investigating that they're seeing this in is very, very interesting to me in my skeptic heart.
Yeah, and it's
very
like
interesting.
The doors, like they move slowly too. And they're kind of like, it's really hard to explain. Like you really need to see the clip. And also, I haven't said it yet, but these documentaries are available for free on Tubi right now. So like everyone should have the opportunity to watch them. It's just a free account. Highly recommend going and check them out. We'll have them in our show notes and stuff. But yeah, the doors move like very slowly, and then they're kind of like corner off.
Slams?
One of them slams. The exterior door, I believe it was, that slammed. But the doors, they like come in.
And it moves slowly?
It starts to. And then it'll slam, like as it opens. Because it opens from being closed.
Okay.
And then goes back and slams.
It opens slowly and then slams shut. Very interesting. So sorry.
I'm very excited for you to see these documentaries, because I kind of, you should record yourself when you're getting to the end of it, because I need to see your reaction to this. Okay. If you don't want to post it on our socials, that's fine. But I personally need to see it.
We should FaceTime. Someday, y'all, when we live in our mansions in the sky, Sam and I are going to have amazing recording equipment where we can sit in the same room as each other.
Yes.
And see each other's reactions someday. But I will, if not record, then I will FaceTime you, and then maybe we can have both of us in the recording for TikTok.
Because it's like, I want to see your face. I think it'll be a good reaction. But now let's jump into the second documentary, and I'm only going to really touch on a few points, because now you know the basics of this haunting. You know the background. And in between filming the first documentary and the second documentary, Alice's daughter passes away from health issues. And while the majority of the film focuses on discovering and documenting the original paranormal claims, they also do spend some time trying to contact Alice's daughter. And during their filming of their one-on-one interviews, they did all of this in the house. So it's one person sitting in a chair with a camera in front of them. Steve's kind of back behind the camera asking questions. And then there's a handful of people there, like doing audio.
I have another request.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have another question. Do we know if Alice's daughter, like, spent time in the house? Did she live in the house ever?
Yep.
She grew up in the house. Okay. Okay. Just checking.
Yeah. Okay. And, like, I don't think that anything with her death is in relation to anything paranormal. I think it was a very, very tragic and unfortunate health issue.
Yeah, I was just trying to gauge on if, like, where her spirit might be.
Well, we'll get to that coming up here, because it's interesting.
Okay.
So during this one-on-one interview with Alice, and there's a handful of people in the room, and you'll actually see a shot overhead of the room where everyone's sitting around, and she's kind of in the center on this chair with a spotlight on her and a camera in front of her. And you actually hear an EVP in this. They didn't hear it in person at all, but it's clearly a woman's voice. I don't know what it says. It's hard to make out. It just sounds female. And then also, since her death, something else that has started in the home is that keys on an organ were being played. And this organ actually turns out to have Alice's daughter convinced Alice to get this organ because it was at like resale shop and no one wanted it and it was supposedly haunted. And so she convinced Alice, like, you should get this, you should put it in the house. And it was after her death that these notes randomly started to play. So that kind of turned into the general belief that this was potentially Alice's daughter communicating, and that she's either tied to the house because she grew up there, or she knows that it's constantly being investigated and it's her best chance to communicate. So that was really interesting.
I wish you could see my face right now. I wish you could see my face. I am shook. Like,
right? Isn't that kind of cool?
The organ is playing.
They all kind of say that, like, we can't say it is her, but, like, this is something she would do.
But the organ's playing.
Right.
Right, but didn't nobody touch that organ? That's the kind of thing. I'm sorry, for me, I R.I.P. Alice's daughter. I hope you can contact your mother and or find peace. But if you be playing an organ with random notes and I don't know when it's going to happen, that's a big no from me.
See, that's something that I would totally do if I was haunting someone. I also love organ
same
music,
thing. So just so they know, but if I were the one who was living in the house, I'd probably do exactly what Alice did and be like, I'm leaving everything I own and I'll buy new things when I get to my new house because this is a no. This is a no. This is a no. That's scary.
Right. But they continue.
It is very interesting that she was the one who said, get the organ. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is interesting.
Yeah, and then they go ahead and continue to discuss the idea of whatever paranormal entity that could be in the house and its ability to learn how to communicate. So they decide to change things up a little bit. They had this ball rolling down the stairs. They have multiple examples of that happening. Mm-hmm. So now they switch it up and they put a doll on the stairs.
No.
And they tell it, like, knock the doll down. Eventually it does. And this is another thing I'm a little curious about, which I don't feel like is incredibly clear, is the timeline from when they put the doll there to when it fell. They have a few shots where it looks like it's at least a handful of days. People are wearing different clothes and that sort of stuff. But was it days? Yeah. Was it weeks? Was it months? Like, I don't know. And I'd be very curious to know that information.
That's another big no.
Dolls.
For me. Any dolls involved, I would be like, I'm selling this house.
Yeah, I don't hate
for
dolls.
Whatever anyone will take for it. I do. I mean, I don't hate dolls in general. I don't like porcelain face dolls.
Oh, see, I don't have a problem with that.
I find them very scary.
Like, I don't desire to have a collection of dolls, scary. But they don't bother me.
Me neither. They aren't part of the collection, but the thing is, they never will be because I think they're scary as fuck. And like, I have a monkey skull sitting on top of my antique cabinet right now. And I think dolls, especially vintage ones, are scary as fuck.
Okay. I know what I'm never getting you for Christmas or your birthday.
Please don't. They're so scary.
So next they bring in ground penetrating radar. And they find many spots that are potential burial spots.
Oh my god.
And this can't be confirmed until everything is dug up. But it could make sense with what they found out within the first documentary of Alice's property potentially being the grounds of the old cemetery. So this could be very logical. But before they make the decision to start digging Alice's whole yard up, they bring in a geophysicist to attempt to explain the lights that she experienced, in addition to anything that might be in the ground that we saw on the ground penetrating radar. And she mentions very early on that this area is rich in quartz and that quartz has the potential to cause lights, which is exactly what we were talking about in our Paulding Light episode. That's piezoelectricity.
Yeah.
And that quartz has the ability to generate enough energy, and with friction, it can emit light. So that's just an interesting tie back to our previous episode, but very interesting.
It also interesting. A word we love here on Have You Heard About This?
It really is. I feel like if we ever make merch, it just needs to say interesting.
Yes, I agree. Interesting.
So this geophysicist calls Steve out to her research tent in the backyard, and she tells him she sees something that's mapping out on the ground that seems to corroborate the ground penetrating radar. She says that she sees something underground that's not the typical soil you would expect. She says that it's similar to something that she has seen before on a project that she has worked on in an area that used to be an old cemetery where the bodies had been removed from the area. So it's showing that it was dug up and then that soil was put back down, but it didn't sit the same as the rest of the soil because it's been moved. So that again just kind of pieces things together here.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that, excuse me. There's so many different degrees you can learn in the world, and I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts, so I don't understand this, but it is fascinating to me that they were able to look at that soil and say, like, this soil has been dug up and reburied.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's fascinating. I didn't know. And I'm sure you might not know, even if you had like ground penetrating radar and a cop. Like, I think they did the best thing and called in a geophysicist.
Well, that's the next step after ground penetrating radar. If you're not immediately digging it up, you need to test the area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now that's why I just really like the way that these documentaries were done, because I want to see the science disprove something. And when it can't, it becomes more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so the next scene is again, a pretty interesting one. So it cuts to an evening inside the house. There's a handful of people walking around. They're not really doing anything specific. This is kind of one of the overhead static cameras. They didn't have a cameraman out actively filming at this moment. And I believe it's Kendall. It's kind of hard to tell because it is that overhead camera. But he gets a phone call, or he gets a call on his walkie, and he starts running around and then runs outside. And this is when the cameraman kind of jumps in, and you see the geophysicist is clearly upset. She's nearly in tears, and she's really trying to gather her words. And she says that she was outside doing her work. It's dark out at this point, but she was still getting some work done. Mm-hmm. And she saw a man walking in the backyard. And when she looked back towards him, he was gone. And this man, she said, was wearing a white shirt, which is what initially caught her eye in the dark. And we then find out that the next door neighbor who we met in that first documentary has also seen this man. And again, she said he was wearing a white shirt before he vanished.
Oh my God. So the 6-year-old girl who always got bad vibes from the house.
Yep.
Saw him too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. And to have the geophysicist who's like, she's not even paranormal related. She's like, this is screwed up. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So
that is compelling.
It's very interesting. And especially like they spend quite a bit of time talking about this geophysicist and how she was a complete non-believer in the paranormal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And how that's why this shook her so much. And she was almost in tears, and she struggled to say it out loud. So that was interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
So now they bring in the psychic back from the first documentary. And she tells Alice that she continued to see visions in relation to Alice's house and the property, and that she saw a man in these visions, and she drew him before coming back to the house, and she calls him the Reverend. And
I don't like that.
Yeah.
No, I like that. That sounds scary.
And this will come back later. I'm honestly not really going to discuss it here, but it's actually a pretty big point in the documentary. Yet another reason to go check it out. Very interesting thing. Mm-hmm. We'll have to get your viewpoints on our discussion of this after you watch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they also decide to bring in a second psychic. And they do the same thing. They don't tell him any details about the house. And when he came in, he basically said the same thing the first psychic said. That there was a spirit here of a man, and that he was described almost the exact same way, very similar to the drawing that the first psychic brought in. And both psychics say that they feel that someone was hanged in the backyard. More specifically, lynched. And they both say this independently.
God.
Yeah.
Oh God. Like they haven't talked to each other. They just both in interviews say that.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And so that goes back to what I'm going to be said early, saying someone died in the backyard. Well, that's what she's referring to.
In the backyard, yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch these documentaries, and I am honestly gonna get scared. Probably.
See, the thing is, that's also the nice thing about the documentaries is they're not filmed to scare you. They are truly filmed for informational and procedural stuff. They're not jump scares. Okay. They're not like anything like that, which makes them very different for a paranormal documentary.
You're right.
But this is the point now where they really start digging up the backyard. They find some pieces of fabric. They find metal. And they even find like a crushed ring that looks very old, but it's hard to tell. It's very, very crushed. It doesn't have its shape anymore. And the conclusion that they really come to from this is that this was indeed part of the cemetery, and these items were left behind when the bodies were removed because they didn't find any evidence of actual bodies. And the reason they really believe this as well is due to the depth that these items were found. They weren't close to the surface level. They were a handful of feet below the surface. So that all makes a lot of sense. But it does. These were just items, but there's no human remains left.
Well, yeah, and maybe, when the town burned down, they said, let's move this cemetery to a further place out so we have more room to build, and that's how poor Alice ended up here.
Yes. Yeah, and obviously this would have been even, I don't know what year the fires were. They didn't even say that in the documentary. I should have looked that up myself, but I didn't. They didn't say that, at least not to my memory. This could have been 100 years.
It doesn't really matter. There's fire.
Like 100 years later. Like, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But next, they showed 2 new investigators coming in. The first is Dustin Perry, who has worked with Steve many times over the years. He was on Ghost Hunters and he was on Ghost Nation with him. And then they also brought in Elizabeth Saint, who is an electrical engineer. And she designs custom equipment for the different investigations she goes on because she wants to make sure that all of the data reflected is specific and calibrated for those locations.
Okay, so she designs paranormal equipment solely, or she designs just equipment?
Okay. I think both, but she uses it for paranormal uses.
Sure. Yeah, probably both.
And her main goal is to try to capture evidence of the light that Alice saw, which caused her to flee her home. And so, as Dustin and Elizabeth both come into the house, they arrive, I think, kind of close to the same time. And both of them immediately say they were drawn to the upstairs bedroom. And specifically towards this crawl space area of the closet. And so this is where they kind of focus their investigation. They decide to do 2 investigations in this area, which again, I find very interesting. One is going to be with just standard equipment, a audio recorder, essentially. And they're going to then follow up in the same exact area, ask the same or very similar questions while having an ion generator running. And an ion generator is going to charge the air. And the theory is that it'll give the spirits more ability to communicate because they'll have more energy to use.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for explaining that.
So I don't fully understand the science behind it, but interesting. It's widely used in paranormal investigations, from my understanding.
Okay.
And one of the things that came out of these 2 sessions was that they asked what object was moved on the stairs. And while we're viewing their first EVP session with just that standard equipment, they didn't hear a response in person, but they heard in the recording baseball. So that's interesting. And Elizabeth brings up,
is it
it's not terribly clear, at least not in my opinion.
But it's but close.
I can hear how you can get baseball, and Elizabeth brings up a really interesting point here. Is that maybe their brains are filling in the word baseball with just the cadence and the syllables, because that their brains already know the answer, and they they fill that in, as I was kind of saying earlier on. Like, your brain just can fill in information whether you're trying to or not.
Yeah.
That's a very normal thing
Yeah,
to
exactly.
happen.
That's how I got an article for someday on a mini episode about sleepovers and how long they've been a tradition with young women. And that's actually exactly how the game Bloody Mary works.
Mm-hmm.
Or, Bloody Anyone. She has different names in different places, but when you look in the mirror and you say something 3 times in the dark and you're allegedly supposed to see something, it's because of the dim lighting. Your brain is filling in features, and they may not look essentially like yours, and that's what frightens people. But it's really just your brain trying to fill it in.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that this was brought up at this point, because I was thinking it while they were listening back to the recording. And so then they go in and they repeat their line of questioning with this ion generator. And again, they ask what item was moved on the stairs. And this time the response says ball. So it's really interesting to me that it's like baseball versus ball. They're both correct answers. So that was interesting to me, that it was seemed consistent when asked that specific question.
Yeah.
And they continued to ask a couple more questions during the second session that had very specific answers, such as what road is the house on? And again, the EVP responses seem to directly answer these questions. So that was.
What's your take on it? Do you buy it?
I'm so torn, because that's like my skeptic in me is like, it's hard to, like, it's kind of hard to hear baseball, but once I'm told it says baseball, I can kind of hear it. I'm not sure if I would have come up with it myself. I find it very interesting that there's the answer is consistent to the same question. But again, I do think that there's the potential that it is our brain filling that in. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this next part is something that actually very much interests me. And this one I think is going to blow your mind a little bit. So they do kind of a fun experiment with a deck of cards. So they're sitting in this dark crawl space, and they lift up a card and they kind of show it to the room. They show it to the camera, but neither Dustin or Elizabeth are looking at the cards. And they start to ask questions such as, what color is this card? But then the next card, they'll switch it up and say, what number is on this card? And so they won't ask a specific question for each one, the same question for each one. They'll vary it up a little differently to try to get a variety of responses with that specifically. And every question they asked had a clear and response to it that was correct. Like at one point they held up a red 10 and it said red 10, and you could hear it, and it was the most clear EVP of anything else we've heard in these documentaries so far.
So like each time they held up a different card?
They did like 3 or 4.
Oh. And they're still getting consistent EVPs for each of the cards?
Yes.
Wow.
So that was very interesting to me. Again, my skeptic brain can't say, yes, I believe, but that was interesting to me.
Right.
And when they're re-listening to these EVPs, this is the first time both Dustin and Elizabeth are looking at the cards. They didn't even know what was there.
They must have been, okay, I was going to say they must have been chilled to the bone, but then I remembered they were paranormal investigators, and instead of being chilled to the bone, they were probably excited as hell.
Oh, no, they were so stoked for it, because they kept saying, like, Dustin Perry was saying that, like, I've never done an experiment like this, and I didn't expect anything from it, and look at what we got. Like, how incredible is this? And that's essentially the last paranormal investigation that this documentary features. And there's a lot of other things that happens at the end here, but I'm not going to give it all away. But the end bit, the conclusion is Steve sitting down with Alice, asking if she'd be willing to spend one more night alone in the house. And I won't tell you if she does or not. You'll have to watch it and find out. But it was just like, it was kind of a good conclusion of like, how do you feel?
I mean, that's a good question to ask, because my answer would still be, hell no, I'm not sleeping in this house. Look at all this stuff you just came back to me with.
And unfortunately, I feel like these documentaries are greatly underrated. And that's a huge reason I made the decision to do this episode. IMDb has the first documentary listed as a 4.1 out of 10. And Rotten Tomatoes has an audience score of 25%, while Letterboxd has a 2.8 out of 5. So these are not strong ratings, which makes me sad because I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
And like if you read the reviews,
it seems like.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, read the reviews because that's what I'm going to talk about.
It seems like in these reviews and all the comments and stuff, it's like nothing happens, or all that happens is a ball rolls down the stairs. And the reason I really disagree with this is because the whole point of these documentaries is to show the process and the work involved to disprove and in turn prove the existence of something paranormal. Like that's the point.
That was my exact thought. That was my exact thought, which was why I was like, let me let you get your words out. I think the low scores are a lot of people like, well, I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything.
Yeah,
and so
it wasn't
2.8 out of 5. Like,
yeah.
It's like, but yeah, like that's not what it's intended to do. Like, it's not a horror movie.
Exactly. And
it's
one thing I will say is it kind of got tagged as a horror documentary.
Oh, did it?
It did. And so
that's unfortunate.
At least that's what a lot of the comments kind of said, is like, I came into this for horror and it's not. And it's like, it shouldn't have been that way.
But it's still good.
Yeah, no, it was filmed beautifully. Like the actual just cinematography of it is beautiful. It has like great like arcs in it. It does really sequential storytelling.
It brings a lot of experts in from many different fields, offering fascinating opinions. Like, I think people are just giving it low scores because they're like, I don't believe in ghosts.
Right. Well, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you don't believe in ghosts. You don't believe in ghosts until you have to call Steve Gonsolves.
Right.
And to your house. Someday.
Right.
You don't know.
But like, one of the things that I learned on the one paranormal investigation that I did, which by absolutely no means makes me anything close to an expert, but it was a lot of sitting and waiting in silence. And it was that's what you have to do. And so I believe like with all of this and how they formed this documentary, they took out some of those moments of silence, but they left the dull parts in because that's a huge part of investigating. That to me, those dull parts were fascinating. Like so,
and when you think about it, like, it's a huge part of any investigation, not just paranormal, but like true crime. A lot of it is just sitting and waiting and working those clues and working that data, you know?
Yeah, and this is also the type of documentary where it makes me question my skepticism, which I think is
we love that.
Yeah, I think that means that it was a very well done documentary, because that's kind of the point. that really is the point of this specific documentary, is to try to prove that it's real and not scientific or physics based. Like that's what you need it to be, and that's what they set out to make, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, like, kind of in conclusion here, like, if you want something that's actually going to scare you and keep you up at night, this probably isn't it. Like, to be honest. But if you're interested in the investigative part of the paranormal world and not just the scares that the paranormal can give you, I highly recommend it. It was really good. It's the first one is like an hour and a half, and the second one's like an hour and 40 minutes. Totally worth the watch, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any final thoughts before you go and watch it?
Yeah, I was going to say my final thought is I'm going to go and watch it and live text you, and we're going to determine what goes on a follow-up episode, what goes on TikTok, and what goes on Instagram.
Yeah, and
because
we'll
I'm
do
definitely
like
going to watch it.
discussion
And
after this. So after you watch them,
yeah,
we'll hop back on.
I'm quite fascinated. Especially with the ground penetrating radar and the geophysics twist. I think that is incredibly compelling.
Yeah.
But those are my final thoughts here before I watch this. Ooh.
Yeah, I'm very excited for your reactions to it. But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.